One of the cutest and most thrilling things to watch is a baby's first steps. I've had the pleasure of watching over a dozen of my nieces and nephews go from just rolling around on the floor to climbing up on their legs, reaching out and grasping firmly the nearest hand or chair, testing their feet and knees, amazed at what they can see when they rise above the ground. And then, from that oftentimes wobbly way of standing, they see us beckoning towards them. And they might glance at the ground, but they keep their eyes firmly on us as they take that first step. We do catch them when they start to tip over on those first attempts, and they do fall a lot because this is something we learn to do. It's like they have no fear of falling. Their eyes are just so wide open in joy and wonder, and they clearly trust us to catch them if they fall. In time, they do this over and over as they lean on us to stop their fall, to protect them. They learn to do it on their own, learning how to not fall, and soon are walking and running everywhere. We take not falling for granted, with many of our friends getting knee and hip replacements, or depending on walkers and wheelchairs. We know that the ability to walk is too easily assumed by those of us who are still abled. Last Sunday and this Sunday, I watched as several of us had to walk down steps out in front of our own church with a walker. But unlike the amazement found in a child's eyes, we often get frustrated about not being able to walk easily. It limits our mobility and forces us to acknowledge our bodies, our dependence on others, and perhaps maybe even our own mortality. A baby, though, they don't see all that. They walk, knowing we're just there, just around the corner to catch them. They just trust that we will protect them even if they fall. So I have to ask, why is Peter so scared? Look at the context here, starting with Matthew 8. There's a fisherman whose mother-in-law was healed by Jesus in their own home. And Peter started from there and goes all the way through Matthew. He had just helped bury in this chapter John the Baptist. He just watched Jesus feed 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and fish. And he had sent everyone into a boat just to be battered by waves. But, Peter was a fisherman, so he probably didn't fear this water. He probably experienced a lot of storms in the sea. So he and the other disciples knew how to take care of themselves. But in the morning, they saw Jesus, not standing on the shore, but walking on the water. It's when they see him that they become frightened. They think they've seen a ghost. They see Jesus walking towards them on the water, and it's not the storm that frightens them, but Jesus doing something impossible, something incomprehensible. But Peter should not be surprised. Why was he so frightened? Jesus didn't want Peter to be frightened. Far from it. He wanted Peter to feel safe, to see Jesus and know that he was there. That's why Jesus made it clear right away that there was nothing to fear in that boat. No matter what they were seeing, no matter what fear they might have held, Jesus was present. "Take heart," Jesus said. "It is I. Do not be afraid." One of the scariest moments in my life happened when I was hiking a few years ago over a mountain on the Camino de Santiago and got caught in a dark, dense fog and hail. My glasses were completely fogged over by the cold, and I was afraid, terrified, that I would accidentally fall off a cliff. I'm not trying to scare you, Chris. This was a unique situation. But in that dark fog, I finally, after an hour, heard someone walk up in that fog. And it turned out to be a young man of about 30 years old. And I'll have to admit, when I looked over, he sort of looked like the star of Jesus Christ Superstar, and just had like, oh, it's Jesus. He didn't have glasses, and he could see clearly, or clearly as he could in the fog. He said to me, "Hello, how are you?" And I told him I was afraid. I probably sounded like the disciples in the boat crying out in fear. And yet, he said, "You will be fine." When he said, "You will be fine," he said it so calmly, so assuredly, that for some reason, my fear left me. It evaporated. I immediately calmed down. It all happened just so quickly. And then he said, "I'll see you on the other side," and continued to walk up and ahead of me into the fog. And much to my surprise, much to my joy, he was wearing the brightest, most dazzling, fluorescent red rain poncho. It was just so bright that I could see it through the fog up there on that mountain. So I followed him, this guy who looked like Jesus, up and up the mountain. And when we reached the top of the Pyrenees, the fog lifted, and he went over the crest, and I couldn't see him anymore. And that's okay, I no longer saw him. I didn't need to see him anymore, because I now could see clearly. And he had led me to safety. That pilgrim will always remind me that when we can find Christ's assuring presence in the middle of our darkest fog, we'll be okay. I followed to the top, just as I follow Christ to the top of the mountain. You know, when Jesus saw that Peter and the other disciples finally calmed down, he added the call, "Come, come." It was an invitation to do something unimaginable, the impossible, to walk on water. And Peter, like the child looking at his parent, fixed his eyes on Jesus and began to walk. But that's when Peter's fears, our fears, take over. And even though he's calling us, sometimes it's not easy to follow Jesus. The waves come at us and our knees get weak. We're like an infant about to tip over while walking. We become anxious and afraid, and we start to sink. We start to fall into the abyss. We cry out like Peter, "Jesus, save me." And Jesus, like a parent would to the infant, reaches out and offers his hand. And he catches Peter, reminding him that he was always safe with Jesus there. There was never a reason to fear. I think about fear and anxiety and how we get anxious in our daily lives. We can fear a lot of things, but one area that puzzles me is how we'd be so scared of actually following Jesus. I was ordained a deacon this past June right here in this beautiful cathedral, and started working here 2 weeks ago on August 1st. As you can imagine, I'm still new to wearing this collar and feel a little self-conscious about it. Well, I take the metro bus and train from Pasadena to this cathedral every weekday, and my first week coming here, I wondered and worried about wearing the collar on public transportation. I was afraid that people would stare at me. I know, I'm an extrovert, and people think, you don't want people to look at you? I was afraid that they would single me out, because there's a lot of people who think that the collar means I'm some sort of Bible-thumping, super conservative person. And there are so many hungry and unsheltered people, people who might need medical attention in our cities and in the public transportation system, and I was afraid that I would be asked for time and material things and money, things that I didn't have on me when I was heading to work. So that first week, I took off that collar, and I carried it in my pocket and put it on only when I got here to the gates of the cathedral. And then this last Sunday, I heard Dean Ann's sermon about the Transfiguration and her call. We are transfigured when in the presence of God. It changes us. And it's not a cause of fear, but a cause for joy. So, with that reminder, on my next train trip this last Monday here to the cathedral, I wore my collar. And some people did look at me. Some people did notice me sitting there on the bus or standing up in the subway metro system. Some people gave me curious looks, but most people smiled. And some people passed me by saying, "Good morning, Padre." Wearing that collar shows that I'm living into my ministry, and ministry isn't something to fear. Ministry is a cause for joy. So I'm growing accustomed to this change. I don't have to fear the change, because leaning into the change gives me an opportunity to grow more as an individual, and to grow into ministry. Like all change, okay, it's different. But if God is present, if God is the one calling for the change in us, then we can lean into the wind, that holy, loving, invigorating Spirit, and allow that change to happen, to be a part of that change, to make that change real. Even then, falling down, if it happens, it's just an opportunity to trust our faith and remember Christ's presence within us and beside us. We can walk fully towards a Christ that calls us to come towards Him, to walk over turbulent waters, to walk through the storm. We won't be hurt even if we fall, not if we know that Christ is there, ready to catch us in case we fall down. When Christ calls you and asks you to come, follow Him. And when your knees shake, may you always know that the one who calls you is also the one who stretches out His arms to catch you. Keep the prayer of a hymn that we're going to be singing later today in your heart. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm alone. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Amen.